for joining.
So as always, you can ask questions by putting them in the chat box to the right-hand side. And if someone has already asked a question you were thinking of, or you just like the question and would like to see it asked, you can upvote it, and time permitting, we'll get to the most popular questions at the end of the session. There's also a poll, which you can see in the chat box as well to the right-hand side. So, please have your say and let us know what you think by voting on the poll. So I'll hand you over to Angela now, who's going to take you through your session. So over to you, Angela.
Okay, thanks a million. And again, thank you all for joining, and hopefully you'll find what I have to share with you that would be helpful and resourceful for you. Today's presentation is put together, I suppose, from feedback from employers. So, it's my advice and it's advice from employers as well. So it's leaving a lasting impression with your CV. And as I said, my name is Angela and I'm the Careers Advisor in Waterford Institute of Technology. Okay, so again, thanks for joining in the Grad Ireland Live event today, and hopefully it's going well for you. So your career all wrapped up in your CV. A few questions I'm posing to yourself to think about today is, what's the purpose of your CV? Sounds a very simple question, but I think if you thought about what the purpose of your CV is, I think for all of us then we actually would put together a very different CV. The main sections to include some general guidelines and some hints and tips about covering letters, because covering letters, what I found, disappeared for a few years and then they came back again. So just to give you some ideas of what you should include. So when you are creating your CV, first you may need to start, I suppose, assessing your skills and your abilities. And that's a challenge for all of us to do. We may be aware of them, but when we're asked to put them down on pen and paper or on the keyboard, we struggle a little bit. Or we'll come back to the generic ones that everyone says they have: time management, teamwork, communication skills. So I'd ask you during this session, and when you are putting your CV together, is think a little bit broad of the skills you have, and also think of the skills that the industry that you're going into requires as well. So again, in all this process, when you are thinking of your skills and assessing them, review what you've been doing, kind of work-wise, career-wise, hobby-wise, volunteering-wise, because everything that you're involved in will have a skill that is transferable as well. Look at maybe what you've achieved on a personal level, academically, work-wise. So all those achievements are important, and achievements mean a lot to employers as well. And it can be a small achievement. You might say, look, I'm the first person that went to college in my family. When I came into college in first year, I had such a good time. I didn't think I'd get to my final year. So whatever the achievement is, it is a milestone for you. You don't have to compare it to anybody else's achievement, but make a note of it and be proud of it. And there may be an option for you to include it in your CV. And then define what skills contribute to these achievements. Even if you do Ironman, if you train a particular soccer group every week, or if you're volunteering on a regular basis, there's skills attached to that. It could be time management, it could be dedication. So think of what you're doing and then think what skills come out of that. So back to the question I mentioned earlier on, what is the purpose of your CV? Okay, we all put together a CV at some stage of our life. It's either an application or a CV when you're going for postgraduate studies, or if you're going for a job opportunity. So one of the things students say to me, it's to get an interview. Okay, so you want to put the thought in to your CV and the work. So in turn then, if it's a job you're going for or a postgraduate course that requires an interview, that you will get that interview. So also, I suppose, looking a little bit more detail into the purpose of your CV, it is to test if you can communicate the right level of detail in the right way. And that's a skill in itself, because it is your CV, it's about you. But as a careers advisor, I'm asked on a regular basis, how much detail do I put in? So it's always a kind of maybe a concern for students. It's your employment sales brochure, so it's going to sell you. Okay, no matter what discipline you come from. It should outline your education and your experience to date. So whatever you've done to date, your related work experience, your general work experience, your hobbies, and then it should demonstrate a match between your skills and the skills required for the job you're applying for. Okay, so it's a matching process for an employer. So an effective CV that you've given it some time and some thought, A good CV will really increase your chances of getting an interview, but not necessarily a job, but it certainly gets you to the interview. And then if you don't put the time in, it has an ineffective CV has the potential to ensure that you don't get an interview. So when you're putting your CV again, think of the employer, think of the reader. And if you have spent a lot of time doing up your CV, how long do you think an experienced recruiter will spend going through your CV and making a decision on whether they'll call you for an interview or not? Is it minutes? Is it hours? Is it seconds? And the reality is, it's down to seconds. And a lot of students, when I'm in a class and talking about that, they find that quite harsh, or that's hard. And how can somebody make a decision so quickly? But experienced recruiters and employers, they know what they're looking for. They have put together a job description. They have told you what they need as regards the roles and responsibility. And they've also mentioned the skills and attributes that they require from you to do the job. So that's fresh in their minds. So when they're scanning your CV in seconds, that information should jump out at them. So usually employers, and they're actually are really in getting a lot better at this. I mean, when I started in careers 100 years ago, employers might say, look, Angela, we always took one of your engineering students every year. Can we take another one? And you were constantly encouraging them to put together a job description, a job spec. And eventually, employers are coming around to that. So they will and hopefully define the job and the role. So they'll tell you in the job description and job spec what they're looking for. They will identify the key skills and attributes for that job as well. And then there'll be shortlisting for a match between the candidate and the job spec. So on one hand, your CV will be looked at, and on the other hand, they have the job description. And it's a matching process, as I said. So did Angela mention in her CV what we looked for in the job spec? And that's one thing maybe to point out at this stage when you're looking at a job spec, and if they're asking you for particular skills, abilities, aptitudes, and if you have them, make sure you put it in your CV. Because sometimes students said, well, look, I wouldn't have applied for the job if I didn't have it. But if it's not written down, an employer may not see that. So if it's not written, it can't be read. And then when you go to an interview, if it's not said, it's not heard. So just to keep those little points in mind. So remember, the clues to what one should put in their CV can be given in the job spec. So it's not a big mystery. They're telling you in the job spec or the job description what the duties and role involve and then what skills are needed. And then for yourself is to make sure they're in the CV. So 3 simple rules for your CV to keep it simple, clear and short. Customize or tailor your CV for every position. We've all been guilty of having a CV and you might say, look, I got the careers advisor to check it. My mum or dad work in an organization. They got the HR department to look at it. My CV was fine. But always update your CV and target it or tailor it to the job you're going for. So go back to the job description, look at what they're looking for. If you have it, pull it out, make it stand out and bold it in your CV. And that shows an employer that you've put the effort in as well. But don't just copy and paste phrases from the advert because that will be very obvious as well. So again, a question I keep putting to employers, when you talk as an employer, I say to them, look, when you talk about tailoring or targeting your CV, what do you mean by that? What's the message I need to tell my students? So they would say a successful CV is targeted to the specific job criteria set out by the employer. So this can be found in the job description and the person specification. So the job specification are frequently divided into essential criteria and desirable requirements as well. So the desirable requirements can be used to narrow down the candidates when there are large number of high applicants. So again, always make sure you have the essential. And then if you have the desirable, make sure they go in. And as I said, that can help them narrow down when there's large numbers. You need to find out what the job involves. Again, go back to the job spec and then think about how this meets the requirements. So again, look at your CV, look what you've done and look at the job description. If you have that, put it in. They may mention something in the job spec that you've covered as part of your course. It could have been a final year project. You could have seen it maybe on a site visit or a webinar or something, again, mention that. An employer knows at this stage of your career, you may not have years of experience and related experience in that industry or that area, but you will have picked up skills, as I mentioned earlier on, and techniques and experience from your college, maybe from practical part of your college or subjects you covered. And don't be afraid to mention those as well. So the whole process is, for an employer, it's a matching process. So a target CV will highlight the evidence an employer is looking for, but a generic CV will hide it or won't pull it out. So some checklists for accuracy and presentation, and I come across this a lot as well when I'm reviewing CVs for students. So ideally 2 pages. Keep an eye on your footers and headers. Sometimes you get a CV and there's very large footers and headers, and the margins are very wide as well. And that then makes your text look quite chunky together, which is hard on the reader. Check your punctuation, your spelling, and your grammar. Also keep an eye on the consistency of the font styles that you're using. And often what happens is, if people are copying and pasting pieces of information from other areas into their CV, the fonts may not be the same. So always check it at the end. Because that organization might want you to have a particular skill like attention to detail. And then when they look at your CV, they see your attention to detail isn't great because you maybe have 2 or 3 different font sizes or styles. So again, a small little tip that can help you. Again, formatting, especially if you're emailing. So before you send off your CV, get it checked and then you can save it as a PDF. Experiment with the layout. Again, keep an eye on your footers and headers and see how it looks. Is there plenty of white space between the sections as well? Avoid having gaps in your CV. Sometimes students might have started a particular course, then they decided to change and go to another course and they leave a gap. So own it, say, look, I started in TU Dublin doing electronics. I did the year and really it wasn't for me. I decided then to go to Waterford Institute of Technology and do business. So don't, there's no problem putting it in, just because I think often what happens, you're expecting someone to ask you about it, and experienced people reading your CV will see there's a gap. You did your leave insert in such a year, then there's a year gap where you did something and you didn't want to put in your CV. So always own it and always stand up. Experiment. Oh yeah, so proofread it. Avoid personal pronouns as well. It is your CV, so of course you're going to be inclined to use I did this, I did that, I organized, I planned, I initiated. So avoid I the whole time in your CV. It is hard on the reader. So if you use an action word, it saves you having I. There's no need for a first page of your CV saying CV on it. If you're printing it off and sending it to somebody, no covering sheet, no binding. Save your CV using your name, not as my CV. I get thousands of CVs over the year with my CV written on it. And when that arrives in someone's inbox, who's my CV to them? Okay, so always save your CV using your name. Another tip I would recommend is avoid using tables if possible, because that again, it can take up more space than you have available. And if you are using a table, I suppose, and it fits in, make sure it's not visible. It's hidden, the lines are hidden on it. I would recommend bolding bold the headings instead of underlining, and certainly don't bold and underline. Again, it's very hard on a reader. Use bullet points to save you using long sentences. An employer is scarce for time, so they're going to be scanning your CV quickly. So if you're using action words, it saves you having long sentences. Organized, planned, initiated, and it's perfectly good English to use bullet points. So try that. Again, the action words that I mentioned earlier on will save you having to put in I the whole time. No photographs on your CV. It is different maybe if you're going to Europe for jobs. And again, check with the country and how their CVs or resumes will be. But in Ireland, we'll be encouraging people not to use a CV. Limit the use of colour. Again, I see sometimes colour coming into CVs. Black and white is perfect. And I would, again, maybe not encourage you to download any fancy templates. A Word document works really well. Okay. So here is a CV sample using headings that I've based on feedback from employers. So again, it's a simple Word document, encouraging as employers said, look, they feel they read from left to right, so right across your page. So your name, your address, your telephone number, your email, your LinkedIn. So again, with your telephone number, small things happen, but sometimes people forget a digit. An email address, make sure it's professional. If you don't have a LinkedIn account, that's okay, just remove LinkedIn. If you're in education, you're starting now. So that's where you're spending the majority of your time is education. So you'd start with your education. If you're working, maybe you're starting with your work first. So if you went the third level, you're starting when you started your course and work back, the name of your college, give the full title of your course as well. Don't assume people will know the abbreviation of what it means. Again, employers are asking, or it came back in the feedback, to educate the employer on your course. Don't assume there's lots of different courses, similar names throughout the college that all the universities and Institute of Technologies are running, and they can be similar. So sometimes they like to see like what's the difference in them. So give a flavour of the main subjects you're covering. Again, write them across the page. If you've got a final year project or a dissertation, give the title of it and maybe one or two lines explaining it. And then you're putting in your third year subjects, your second year or your first year. And again, you're focusing on the main subjects and maybe try and bold the subjects that are maybe related to the industry you're going into. Also, employers like to see if you've any additional projects that you might have carried out over your time of your course as well. Any webinars, any CPD you've done, site visits, visiting lectures, whatever it's been, it's good to put it in, and that can also add to the richness of your CV. Then your second level, name where you went to school. You can put in your grades for each subject if you wish, or you can give this the summary of the points you got, or you can also say grades available on request. But the main thing is, as a raw graduate going out, educate the employer. And once you get your first job, then this information reduces. So with your work experience, you may be fortunate to have related work experience, and then you can change your heading to related work experience first, and then you can have additional work experience. Employers know for the stage you are at your career and maybe for your age, you may not have related work experience. You've taken up a job to pay for college, it's nearby, it helps, you can fit it in around your studying. So there's no problem with that. So start now, the last job you had or the one you're doing now, and work back. The name of the organization you're working with, where they're located. You can either use the heading of a role or the position that you had, the date. What are the responsibilities that you had as part of that role? And then what they like to see is what skills have you gained while you worked there? So, for example, if you have a job working in Tesco's, you could be on the floor, you could be on the till, and then you're talking about what you do there and the skills. It could be attention to detail, it could be working under pressure, it could be time management, it could be organizational skills, it could be customer relations. So all of those skills that you pick up, you can bring with you to any job with you, and don't be afraid to say that. And often what happens as well, an employer might say to you at an interview, looking at your CV, I don't think, or I don't see any related work experience. And if you don't, that's okay. But they've called you for an interview and they know you don't have related work experience. But what they often like to see is that you can volunteer. I don't have related work experience, but while working in my part-time job, I gained the following skills. And when I looked at the job description, you mentioned those skills, and I feel I would be quite competent in those areas. So you're focusing on what you have. So any of the part-time jobs you've had. Another question that students often ask me is, look, I've had a number of part-time jobs, maybe a month here, a week here. I also babysit for my neighbor. So you can, if there's too many, you can also say, look, additional information. Also, I have experience babysitting on a regular basis for family and friends. I also help every second weekend with the local youth club. And if you require more details on any of these, feel free to ask. Also, it's important to put in your computer skills. Depending on your background and the course you're doing, you might have operational systems that you can put in, programming languages that you might have, or computer skills you might have picked up as part of your part-time jobs as well. We're all experts on Zoom now, Microsoft Teams. So mention those in your CV. Don't take them for granted. If you did an ECDL, you can mention it. If you're teaching yourself any computer languages as well, put that down. Language skills are always sought after. So if you have a language skill, mention the language, mention the level you have. It could be conversational French, it could be mother tongue is Spanish. You could have done junior cert Spanish, leaving cert French. So again, the level you have, or it could be an elective as part of your course. Your interests and hobbies as well are always, I suppose, give an insight to you as an individual. So don't forget to put those in. Try and, I suppose, use categories or heading that'll kind of summarize them. And I suppose what I would say, spending time on Instagram or Facebook or TikTok isn't really a hobby an employer would like to see unless you set it up for an organization or that. So think of the hobbies you have. Don't make them up. You might say, look, Angela, I'm so busy at the moment between my part-time job and college, I don't have time for a hobby. So it's when you have time for a hobby, what would you do, or what's that hobby? Okay. And don't just list them, maybe have a sentence to explain them. Excuse me. With referees, always ask permission. And if you can't get the permission before you send off your application, you can always say references available on request. If you're in college, again, maybe ask for a referee to give the correct title of the lecturer that you have. It doesn't have to be your course leader. It doesn't have to be the head of that department. It's somebody that knows you. So the name of the person, what subject they teach you or what their role is, the college, and an email address. And maybe because people are working from home, their office number isn't suitable at the moment. And then maybe where you did your part-time job. So you can have 2 to 3 referees. And again, I've included here some action words to get you thinking what you can put in your CV instead of using I. And when you look at job descriptions as well, they mention a lot of action words as well. So put those in as well. Here's some other kind of action words I've used when you break down maybe particular jobs you've had. So have a look at those as well. I'm happy for my presentation to be shared with you, and I think it's been recorded as well. So common mistakes that you see people come up on a regular basis, and when you point them out to somebody, they're just annoyed, or they say, oh God, I should have seen that. But look, always get it checked. Check the spelling. It could be the correct spelling, but the wrong, could be American spelling. Too much or too little information, that's a challenge for all of us. Irrelevant details, including your age. I've seen recently in CV, PPS numbers, you don't need that. You don't need photographs, marital status, anything like that. And no personality in your CV, so it just doesn't kind of, it's almost like a computer printed it, poor presentation, there's things all over the place. So again, the template that what I've used and I've shared with you there, it's very clear, it's very easy for the reader. So all the time, think of your reader. Dull vocabulary, that there's no action words in it, it's too general, and that you haven't targeted your CV. So start with a clear understanding of what the sector is looking for. So look at the job description, look at that sector. What does your sector that you're applying for jobs require? So skills required in engineering, skills required in the computer industry, skills required in business, all that information is very accessible with the click of you can Google that. Ensure your CV is targeted and relevant. So again, go back to the job description. Use the best examples you've got as well. So if you're mentioning a skill, you might want to kind of back it up with an explanation. Review your CV, read back over it and ask yourself, so what? I've mentioned this, so what does that actually mean to the reader? And ask others for feedback. Because as I always say, it's very hard to get a second chance to form a first impression. And your CV is the first impression someone will have of you. And that, again, we've all formed first impressions. Don't lie so employers can check, and you will get caught out. So again, don't exaggerate information either. So covering letters, as I mentioned to you, or a letter of intent, are on the increase again. So your covering letter is not the first page of your CV. They are separate documents. And also it's important that you save them as a second document as well. It's worthwhile spending a little bit of time producing again an individual covering letter. Emphasize what you can do for them. So again, with the covering letter, you're saying what you can do for the organization, not what they can do for you. Don't be afraid to be enthusiastic. And again, it needs to be polite, but not overly formal. So the opening, say which job you're applying for, maybe say where you saw it. Again, if you didn't see the job and you're applying on spec, that's fine as well. You can say, look, I'm a final year student in Waterford Institute of Technology, and I'm very interested in the latest product your organisation is developing. I did a final year project on it. I'd be very interested to see if you have openings or opportunities. Why you, tell them why you're a good candidate. Describe how you match the job description. Again, it's positive language. You're talking about maybe experience you have, skills you've gained, and knowledge of that sector and interest in that sector as well. Why them? Why are they a very good company to join with? I see, you've won the Grad Ireland Award for the last 4 years, Best Employer. I was at a presentation that the work placement students gave. Spoke to a friend who did their work experience with yourself. They were very, very impressed. So again, massage their ego, give them the positivities about themselves. Again, like all of us, if you're addressing a CV to a dear sir and madam, it may not get as much interest. So try and find out who you can write to, if at all possible. And if not, it's dear sir and madam, and you're ending it yours faithfully. If you know who you're writing it to, it's yours sincerely. So summary, your covering letter needs to highlight your key selling points, okay? The opening paragraph should outline the purpose of the letter, why, who you are. And I don't mean kind of saying, look, I'm Angela Collins, because they know that, they've seen it. But you're saying, look, I'm a final year student in such a college, in such a course. What specific job you're applying for and where you saw it. Why you want that job. So demonstrate your interest and your enthusiasm, what you have to offer. Again, so refer to the CV application form and highlight the main evidence that your skills and experience match what they're looking for. I see in the job description you mentioned the following. I did a project on that. I see in the job description you mentioned having experience. I worked 2 summers in that area. I did my workplace in that area. So the whole thing is you're offering them and giving them the evidence. Why are you interested in that employer? So again, focusing on that. And the closing paragraph, as I mentioned earlier on, is polite and a positive ending. So some do's and don't. Do construct your CV with the particular employer in mind. Look at the job spec, find out the main activities of that employer. They'll either be on the job spec or you can Google it. Tailor your CV to the job. Your CV shouldn't be your life story, but it should be tailored for the job you're applying for. So it's focusing on the parts that are important to the particular job spec. Make your CV clear, neat and tidy. Again, I suppose the format and the layout I've given you helps that to happen. Get somebody to check your spelling, your grammar. No one wants to read a CV that's squashed together and includes too much information. So I'm all for including kind of a lot of white space between the headings as well. Your CV should be easy to read, as I said, the white space between it. And again, sometimes it can help if you use the left justified text, as it's easier to read. And again, using black text on quality white or cream paper if you are printing it off. So they do want to view your experience in a positive light. So try to look objectively, I suppose, at all your experience, even the bad one. Look, we've all had a part-time job in an organization that we didn't like. But again, identify what you've learned, what skills you developed as part of that. Okay. So, sometimes an employer will say, oh, I see you worked in company X. I heard they're hard to work for. Don't collude, don't go down and mention anything negative about it. Say, look, it was interesting. It got me through college. I learned a lot of skills from it. Again, place the important information up front. So put your experience and education achievements in reverse chronological order. So starting now, as I've mentioned earlier on, and look back. Okay. And then I suppose place the important information up front, as I said, and put your name and email address on each page in case it gets lost. Use positive language, as I've mentioned, how you describe your work, so you're using your action words. And then if you want to give examples, quote concrete outcomes to support your claims as well. So, I reduced the development time from 7 days to 3 days, or this changed the company's internal structure and led to the reduction. So again, that you have the evidence. So some of the don'ts. Don't include information that will be viewed negatively. If you failed exams, if you're asked it, you can mention it, but you don't need to put that down. If it's a failed business, venture, reason why you left the job. So don't lie, but don't include negative information that doesn't need to go in. Don't include anything that might discriminate against you, like your date of birth, marital status, race, gender, or disability. And again, employer salary expectations, don't put them in. Again, make sure your CV is not maybe longer than 2 pages. Sometimes as a raw graduate, it can go on a little bit, but if you check your footers and headers, you may be able to reduce that. Again, you don't need to kind of, I suppose, have or keep an eye on what you're putting in, and some of it you might be able to reduce. Don't dilute the important message. It is important to concentrate on demonstrate that you have the skills for the role as well. Again, sometimes we all use acronyms and jargon or technical terms that are familiar to us, but they may not mean anything to the outside world. So just be careful about those. Don't lie and don't use a photograph. So again, just before I finish, to think of the whole CV and recruitment process, from an employer's point of view, they have a job specification that they're mentioning the qualifications, the experience and expertise. They will have looked at your CV or application form for that. Then they'll either make a clear match and call you for an interview, or if there isn't a clear match, there's a letter of refusal, or often what happens, you don't hear from the employer at all. So then from your side, analyze the vacancy, analyze your suitability. And option A then, demonstrate a clear match. So look at what you have and what you can bring to the role. And that means you're targeting your CV, and that increases your chances of an interview. But if you don't do that and just send in a generic CV, you may not get an interview at all. So thank you very much. Just on the dot of time, I hope, but I am here for questions if anybody wants to ask me questions. So thank you very much.
That's great, Angela. Thank you so much for that. Really, really good advice, practical and simple in the sense I think people can implement it right away and start using some of the tips, which is great. We got loads of questions, so many, so I won't get
No
time to get through all of
problem.
them. And to be honest, I think you answered most of them. That presentation was so good that you answered most of them as they were coming in. But just one here that I think is, maybe really apt at the moment. And if just a really quick one here quickly. If you have any gaps in your CV from the coronavirus, when maybe your job has ended or you've had to take time away, what's the best way to demonstrate that on the CV? Or maybe you don't want to draw too much attention to it if there is a quite a large gap there.
Yeah, I think if there is a gap or you struggle to get part-time work because of the virus, I just think was actively looking for work or had a job, but due to the virus, my employment was ceased. Because to be honest, I'm seeing that so much on CVs, and I suppose individually, all of us think it's just us. But as a careers practitioner, I'm seeing it on CVs a lot, and employers are seeing it a lot. But one thing you can do, I suppose, moving forward is to say, well, look, what did I do during that time? Did I actually volunteer? Did I help? Was I caring for a family member? And even small things that might come naturally to you. You might have been doing the grocery shopping for a next door neighbor. That comes naturally to you. But if you're doing it, fill it in, put it on your CV. Helping out. Like volunteering, there's a lot of people. There's a lot of organisations that are still operating volunteering, even online. Or supporting or helping. So if you've lost your position or found it hard to get a position during the virus, it is what it is now, and just don't leave the gaps. You're just saying one-liner, due to the virus, and my part-time job actually had to stop. And the other side of it, you can say, look, I did this instead, I volunteered. But looking forward, see where the openings are to volunteer and help. So then you are keeping your CV active. If there's any webinars, if there's anything, even like I know Target, you had a lot of stuff going on in Greater Ireland, even to build up. So while I was unemployed or while I was actively looking for work, I made sure every week I would, watch a webinar on the following. I would learn a new skill. I would do the grocery shopping. I would X, Y, and Z. And it's amazing what you can do, what's available. And sometimes, recently I just saw something myself in Waterford, like an organization called Helping Hands, and they, are helping people in lots of different ways. But they had a call out, we're looking for home cooking for, you know, for people who sleep on the street. You know, if you could help us out, great. Make cookies, make X, Y, and Z, just individually wrap them and drop them at such a centre. I mean, that's something small all of us can do. And you have a feel-good factor yourself. So, you know, you're not putting yourself in danger. There's a drop-off point. You've individually wrapped it. And something like that can, you know, is good to put on your CV. So look at what's out there and what you can help out with.